So, I'm so excited to be here with y'all today, and we're going to talk about writing a fictionalized memoir. My debut novel, Red Clay Suzie, as you know, is a fictionalized memoir, and I, you know, I was. I'll give a little bit of backstory and have some guidelines I want to share, but I want us to really have an interactive session. I have an exercise plan that I hope is helpful to you. And I don't know where you are in your writing journey. Some of you may have a full manuscript. Some of you may be just starting out. So what I've planned, I hope, is helpful for everybody. And then we can talk. We can ask, have questions and answers. Whatever y'all need, that's what I want this session to be. And so to start at the beginning, I didn't know I was writing a book. Certainly not a fictionalized memoir when I first started writing. I started writing when I first left home to go to college many years ago. And I grew up in Warm Springs, Georgia. And I went to college at LaGrange College in LaGrange, Georgia, which was only about 30 miles down the road.
I live in Fort Bell.
Oh, really? Okay, we're neighbors. What's your name?
Anna Holloway.
Anna Holloway. In fact, before I go any further, why don't we all go around the room and give our names? I know that this is Jeff.
Shane.
Shane.
And Anna.
Anna.
Gary.
Gary.
Jan,
Jan.
Carissa,
Carissa.
Judy,
Judy.
Jada,
Jada.
Jada,
Jada.
Sherry,
Sherry. Kitty.
Phyllis,
Phyllis. Well, I'm glad you all are here. Thank you. And I'm Jeffrey. And we have some friends watching on the internet too. So what happened is I was born in Warm Springs, Georgia, gay, with a significant skeletal malformation of the chest. And when I went off to college for the first time, it's the first time I was away from home, and I had spent my entire life sort of suppressing, pushing down years of humiliation and shame and fear and lots of anger. And when I was away from home, all of that started to come out of me. And I found myself kind of in crisis. Not kind of in crisis, I was in crisis. And I didn't know what to do with myself. It was like these white-hot memories of my imperfect family, my perfectly imperfect family in childhood and teenage friends. Just sort of these memories, I was awash with them. And as a natural instinct, I started to journal. No one said, why don't you write about it? It might make you feel better. I just started doing it as a natural instinct, and it was so helpful. It was like a salve on a wound, during those really early years, that first year of college especially. And I've come to think of it as an exorcism by exposition. So one might think, well, you'd continue writing, wouldn't you? Well, you would think, but coursework really got in the way. I got really busy, overwhelmed, and I stopped writing. I put it away. I thought I'd go back to it, but I put it away. And I didn't go back to it for decades. And then I read 2 books several years ago, fast forward to just a few years ago. And I've always been a voracious reader, but 2 books in succession, I think them one after the other is really the key to what started me on the journey of writing a fictionalized memoir. One was a book I reread. It was The Incandescent To Kill a Mockingbird. And there was a shock of recognition with that other outsider child character, Scout. And then the other book was Call Me By Your Name by Andre Aciman. And those books are not really alike. But there was something about both of them that resonated with me, and the proximity of them, it was like they sparked. And that spark caught me on fire. And I knew I had to go back and find those journals from many years ago and start this process again and finally get this story all the way out of me. I went back, got those journals, I read them. They were very raw emotionally, kind of embarrassing. Something that I never intended anyone to read. They were for me. So I started writing again on my mobile phone, on the train going to and from my job at the Library of Congress. And that's how I wrote my first draft. That was my process. Everybody has their own process. What worked for me may not work for you. And what works for you may not work for me. So that's how I started the process. I actually finished the book, not for myself, but for young people who are in crisis today. 41% of queer kids seriously consider killing themselves in 2022, and 14% of them actually tried it. That was a devastating statistic to hear. So the book I finished and decided, well, the journals were for me, but the book, I hope, is for other people to help them maybe find a roadmap that they can follow, a journey within their heart to a better place. And also, that's why I've decided that part of the proceeds will go to the Born This Way Foundation and the Trevor Project to support the important work they do to support at-risk youth. So that's my journey to writing a fictionalized memoir. Now, why might I do a fictionalized memoir instead of a memoir? That was really not a difficult question to answer. Writing a memoir and a fictionalized memoir is telling one's truth. Because if you don't tell your truth, if I didn't tell my truth, it would be no purpose in me writing that story. That was really why I wanted to do it. But there are some there are some tripping hazards in telling a story like that. Certainly a memoir, but even with a fictionalized memoir, because it's not just your story, it's other people's story as well. And so being careful about what you put on paper and share is really important, because you have the potential to really affect other people's lives. So, and this is proof that I'm a total certified nerd. I've got a baggie with Post-it notes with cards on it to write from. So I'm going to pull this out because I want to be sure we cover everything in the short amount of time that we have. And also, if you have any questions at any point, please ask. This is not me just talking. This is interactive, and we'll get to an exercise in a very short order. Okay, so treading lightly, so you want to write in service of a good story, but you want to be true to yourself at the same time, but it does have the potential to hurt, which we talked about just a moment ago. And so there are ways to, if you decide to fictionalize, which I assume that's something we're all here to talk about, there are ways to minimize the impact, the negative impact on other people. And it might be as simple as like changing the name of somebody. It could be that simple, because trust me, people don't always recognize themselves. They don't. And sometimes it's about changing the order of events so that it didn't happen in 1975, it happened in 1985. That gives you some latitude. And if things happen in a different time or place, people think, oh, I wonder who did that. Because they think, well, when I did that, it was earlier. So there are ways that we can get around that. But the fundamental thrust of the story arc remains true. I think even when people write a straight memoir, I think they change things a little bit too. Yeah, because life does not play out in these nice little packages where everything happens in order and create these nice story arcs. You have to put things a little bit in order to make them work, to make the story more compelling. So what I've done is I have come up with what I think of, and I'll just go to my here. I've come up with what I think of as the big 6 guidelines for writing a fictionalized memoir. And so this is what worked for me, and I hope that there's something within this. Maybe not all of this is valuable for you, but I hope some of it will be. So people say, how do you remember all that stuff? Because I wrote about the time when I was a child. The book starts in the late 60s and goes to the early 1980s. People said, how do you remember all that stuff? Well, when I wrote about candy, that was easy because I loved to eat candy. I knew every single candy there was in the store. But there are more memories in there than that. And so I created a time machine to take myself back emotionally, mentally. So what does that mean? It really means surrounding yourselves with things that take you back, make you think of that time and place. The thing that had the most impact and had the most positive outcome for me was listening to music from that era. I listened to a lot of 1970s pop music because it took me back. I felt like I was riding around in my mother's car. I almost said my mama's car. But it took me back, and I could remember sights and sounds of being in that time. It made me forget where I was, and it took me back to being a child again. So there are other ways to do that too. So you can create a playlist of music from that era, the decade or era that you're writing about. That might work for you. You can also surround yourself with things from the past. One thing that I also did, and I think it's in here, is so as a child, I loved cars. I was obsessed with cars. I still am. And I love Matchbox cars. This is my 1968 Mercury Cougar with doors that open. And this little car was my very first one. I loved it from the beginning. It's my favorite toy of all time. And I carry this whenever I go out to talk to folks about Red Clay Suzie. And this little car, I imagine, had wings. The doors were wings. And we flew places that only existed in my imagination. And it really saved me because it let me live in a world other than the physical world that I was born and grew up in. So I have a little fleet of Matchbox cars next to my computer. That helps. I also have something else I'm going to pull out of my bag I forgot I had. And so excuse me while I duck down out of the thinking. It's like a magic trick, isn't it? Actually, I think maybe I left it in.
Do you mind passing around the Mercury Cougar?
Oh, sure, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for reminding me of that.
I like
And
that
then
first.
I've got what over here. Now this won't be as a surprise to you all as it is to other people. But this is Red Clay
Oh my goodness.
from my parents' front yard. So here's the Mercury
They were
Cougar.
doing show and tell.
We got a show and tell. I love show and tell in school because that was like time away from the lessons. But this is in a properly washed and dried Duke's mayonnaise jar. Duke's mayonnaise jar. And I have about 6 of them. My parents and my older brother filled these and sent them to me in Washington, D.C. And so when I take these, I say, oh, please open it and smell it. It's such a light scent. We'll start on the scent for this. It's such a light and delicate scent, but it really helps me to have that that's the one. That's the travel size. I've got one next to my computer, and I'll see it, and I sometimes open it, but it takes me back to that red soil of Georgia because I don't have that in D.C. where I live now. And well, I hope I don't have it. I'm writing now in the basement mostly, not on my phone. But stuff like that really helps. You might have a brooch or a scarf or a tie or something from a loved one, maybe a grandparent who is integral to your story. Something to bring that person back to you. Something you can touch. And if you are like many who don't write at a computer all the time, maybe you go in the backyard or you go to the park and you write on a pad, a paper. Somebody said, maybe you said you write outside sometimes. Somebody said that, I don't know who it was.
Late at night.
Late at night, okay. Sometimes maybe you go to a cafe. Well, you don't want to take your Red Clay to the cafe. Now, you may want to do that. I don't know you. I don't know. But I'm not going to haul that to a cafe. I'll take it to California or here, but I'm not going to take it to a cafe. But you can take photographs on your phone and pull them up, little fleet of Matchbox cars, the Red Clay, Granddaddy's favorite tie. It can take you back. It certainly did me. So that's one thing. Create a time machine that you can, revisit anytime you need to be taken back to your unique world. The next thing is to write in journals, whether it be on your telephone, or on your computer, or on a pad. Now, thank you. Did the folks back there get the business card? There you go. Now, the reason I mentioned this, I was writing in journals as an instinct. It just, sort of happened as a way for me to sort of save myself, I think. However, I've always been a writer. Even after I gave up this little project during college, I've written during all those interviewing years up until the present. But I never told anybody, and nobody ever knew. And so when this book popped out, they said, "You did what?" They said, "I didn't know you could I didn't know you were doing this, and so I never told anybody. And one of the reasons I never told anybody is because I never really produced anything. I had these grand ideas. I'd see a story from beginning to middle to the end, and I'd start writing. Like, I'm going to do this. I wasn't on my phone then, I was on the computer. And I was typing away, and it would always just end up being nothing. I'd lose interest, I'd lose an idea, and I'd think, ugh, failure. Again. And it was kind of, it just made me feel like I wasn't meant for this, that I didn't have a voice. And part of the problem is that I was going about it the wrong way. I didn't have a process. So journaling, because I wanted to write, I wanted to get words on paper. Journaling is one way to get around that. You can write, you can get to it immediately, but there's no expectation of meeting a word count or creating anything that has a story arc. It's just writing. You're getting thoughts out of your head. But what it does also, in addition to letting you get to writing, it gives you this really rich source material that you can pull from later on, especially if you're doing a fictionalized memoir. So a journal, I think, is a really important exercise that you can do anytime. You can be anywhere. You can write on your telephone. So journaling.
Does Facebook count?
Yes,
Yeah,
I use
it
it.
is. It is. But other people are going to see it, especially your daughter.
Yeah.
Oh, they see it.
Yeah,
see
no,
it.
he's saying because I
Oh.
process my trauma and all of that. I was write all of this stuff, and then I post a couple things.
But you have access to it for later on.
Yeah,
It's great source material.
my mom has said because they'll get a lot of flack from I'm friends with all of their friends, all of that, and they'll be like, what? How could you And she's like, read the comments. Read the comments. You can see what she's up to. All of the people who are processing what they're going through and all of that through watching what she's doing. So,
It's really great.
You couldn't be more intimate with what she writes. She just publishes it to the world.
And everybody has
It's just like you would write in a journal, probably. Very private things to yourself. It's just
I do it publicly.
Her generation just does it for the world.
I don't think my generation does that. I think it's just
I think you just called me old.
I
I think you just called me old. That's what I think. That's what I take away from that. I'm just joking.
There's a beauty in that, though. Sorry,
Yeah,
can I say
yeah,
one thing?
yeah,
Because
absolutely.
you're not waiting for Simon & Schuster to be like,
Yeah.
you're worthy.
Oh,
You're
yeah.
just getting it out there in the world.
It's-
That's beautiful.
I know that it helps other people, and when I was
Yeah.
first trying to figure out my stuff, there wasn't anybody to turn to. I didn't know that anybody else was going through any of that, and when I saw some people post about some things, I was like, oh, wait, we need to know that people go through all of this too.
Hi, come on in.
I've got a pretty big following. I mean, not big, but like 3,000 people or something. And people come out of the woodwork all the time, and they're like,
That's
I've never
really
commented,
big,
I've never
It is big.
reacted,
That's
you don't know
awesome.
I exist, but you changed my life, I've been following you for years,
That's a lot.
And it all goes back to why you want to do this. If you want to have an impact on other people's lives, which I certainly wanted to have here, everybody has a different way of doing that. This was my way of doing that. There's no one right or wrong way to do it. And people have different thresholds about when and how they share and what they share with other people. And that's what you decide to do.
Yeah, this is making the point that I already journal.
Yeah,
Just do it
yeah,
publicly.
yeah. I think it's great. And you have it at your, it's always captured, recorded, if you want to use it for any other
That was
purpose.
another books that I was going to do, is just have, I can hire somebody to just go through and mine all of that and shove it all into a book and then just publish it.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's that's number 2. Journaling. Because it really helped me because I was able to write, but I didn't feel like a failure at the end of it. Because there's no expectation other than to just write what I was thinking. The third one is my least favorite of all of them, but I find it necessary. And in some of these sessions I attended yesterday, there was talk about outlining. So producing a story arc outline. And I'm, plotters and pantsers and the range in between. I'm definitely on the pantser side of the range. Because I don't like to, I don't want to do structured stuff. But I think it's necessary. It is for me, even though I hate doing it. And so after I had written quite a bit, a lot of the content from the journals is actually in the book. But I thought, where's it going? So I had to outline it. I had an idea of where I wanted it, well, definitely where I wanted it to begin, and the middle, and then the end. So to outline it, which I never stuck to, but it kept me in the world that I needed to stay in. Because I don't think in a linear fashion at all. I'm very, I really have to pull my thoughts, center them, because I don't really stay there naturally. So I can like, oh, I wonder what that switch on the wall does over there. And I might say, oh, and I remember we talked about it yesterday. So my thoughts are all over the place. It helps me to have an outline to keep myself on a path. I actually outlined this book twice. Once, sort of early-ish, and then towards the end. And I got off track because I got on tangents, but they ended up being rich information. To stick to an outline for me stifles creativity, and I didn't want to do that. So number 3. And for you who just came in, I'm giving 6 guidelines that I follow to write a fictionalized memoir. And we're going to have an exercise. So the first one was to create a time machine, which is, I listen to a lot of 70s pop music because that's the era when I was writing about. You can be anything about, it can be surrounding yourself with things that matter to you, that take you back to that era. This is a jar of red clay. Takes me back to Georgia when I'm not there. And cars feature prominently in the book and in my life. So a little matchbox car. I have a fleet of them next to my computer. Could be a brooch from a loved one, or a scarf or tie, anything that takes you back to that era. And then the second one, of course, is to journal. Third, story arc outline. Okay. The next one is to do your research. And you're writing about your own experience. So you think, well, what research do I need to do? I'm writing about myself. Well, I was writing about a time when I was a child, and I didn't know what was going on politically. I didn't know the socioeconomic dynamics of that era, and especially where I was growing up. So doing research like that makes sure that the story that you create, the world that you're creating based on the real world, is accurate and grounded in something real. Because even though it's fictionalized, it's not a fantasy work, at least mine's not. And that was important. I did research even the most simple things, like how much did a Matchbox car cost? Because all I know is I asked for them, I begged for them and got them. I don't know how much they cost. So that was...
How much do they cost?
They cost between 50 cents and $1.25. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
How much do they cost now?
This one, if it was gold color, it would be like $1,000. Because they were very rare. The green one, which is my favorite, they were very common, which makes sense that I got it. But yeah, and so some of them were very rare. There's a dune buggy. There's a purple one and a pink one, and I think the purple one's the rare one. I got the pink one, and I got the pink one. And so yeah, some of them can be quite expensive. But I mean, I wouldn't sell. I got one rare-ish one, but I wouldn't get rid of it for anything.
That's what they're worth today from the old ones.
Yes.
What are new Matchbox cars?
Oh, new ones. No, Matchbox is not having its best days right now. Yeah, they're like $4 Someone gave me a gift of a pack of them, I think 8 of them, and there's like a wrecker, but they're all branded, with some sort of company. I think there's an Amazon delivery truck in there. I said, thank you so much, because the thought behind it was so lovely.
Yeah, that's so sweet.
But like, oh, Matchbox, you sold out.
Yeah.
Kind of breaks my heart a little bit, but there's. Oh, a Matchbox Honda Element? Cool. $30? Wow. Well, they don't make them anymore. You have one? My brother has one. What color is yours? My brother's is orange. Well, that's a good reason to go to buy daily. That and the onion. Bring some onions back.
In their defense, I have really sold a lot of little boys and Annie who see those trucks out there, and are very taken by them and very fascinated to have their own little version of an Amazon truck. They see it come to the house and all that, and I think they recognize it.
I'm sorry to denigrate, but sorry.
There is a market for it because other
Oh, I'm sure there's a market for it.
in love with it. Yeah.
Those three.
But what about we have an open air market across the street from us every Saturday. It's a New Morning Farm. Like, what about a New Morning Farm truck instead of an Amazon truck? I'd like that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah. So so research. Doing research is important. It may be more important for some than others, depending on what you're writing about. Mine was, a very personal story, and so the research. I mean, there wasn't. I don't claim to do as much research as a lot of writers. There wasn't a need for it for this book, but it's certainly a step you should go through. The next one is to take a deep breath and start to write, because you've done your prep work now. And so getting down to the hardest part, which is writing the memoir. At least one might say that's the hardest part. Others might argue that's the easiest part. It depends on your process and what's easy for you. Some people are very prolific, I understand, in writing, so that was not my experience. But in all my advice, all I can advise here is just to do it. Don't wait don't wait to sit down and wait for the muse to come and tap you on the shoulder, because the muse may not ever show up. It's about exercising that writing muscle. You got to get to it and write. Something may come, something may not. What you write might be worthless. But it's the act of getting into the chair, writing every day. It's consistency. Going back to the well.
Just to add to that, Dorothy Parker, I've said this in my panels, but Dorothy Parker is a great one. She says the art of writing is about applying a fast to the chair. It's very true.
There you go. Who could say it better than Dorothy Parker? Who Jeff Clements? I don't think we could do any better.
That's really well said.
It's a great one. I live by it.
Yeah, you have to. You really do. You have to. So it's a discipline, a muscle that you need to exercise. And once it's developed, nothing can hold you back, because you're going to get your story out. And the final one, and I mentioned this yesterday, and if you were in the session, this might be a duplication, but I always, you're creating versions of people that you knew, but you don't want to. It's not a character assassination. It's more about creating nuanced, richly drawn descriptions of imperfect people. And in that way, you can be kinder in this process. You can get the truth out of it, but it's not done in a mean-spirited way. So my advice here is to, like Charles Dickens, Sketches by Boz, his job was to go out and observe people doing everyday things, everyday people doing everyday things, and to go back and write about it for the newspaper. And he was so skilled at this. Reading Dickens is, another good thing to do. It's not part of the notes, but that's another good thing to do. He even got so good at it, he didn't even have to go out and observe. He pretended he did and started writing about people, continued to write about people. But that's really the beauty of his talent. But observing is so important, because you get to not just talk about the feelings that you had and the impact it had on you, but you're an observer. Like, that person did that. You can make up your own reasons about why they did it. But observing other people is a very important thing to do, just as a writer, I think. So very briefly, those are the six guidelines. I do also want to make one point that, writing a fictionalized memoir can be very freeing. It can be very constricting. It's freeing because you have the ability to, to change around time, put certain events in a different place. You can change events to meet your needs, to make the story arc more compelling. You can create characters who never existed. You can give an alternative ending to a friendship or a relationship that really didn't happen in real life. But it's also constricting because, as we talked about, it can deeply hurt people if you're not careful. Sometimes change the name, maybe that does it. Change the order of events might do it. But if you have to actually write it as it happened, my best advice is to try to do it with as much empathy and kindness as you can, and let that be your driving force. Because people may end up hurt. They may end up feeling as though um, they may feel called out. That's not your intention, but if you do it with as much kindness and care as you possibly can muster, it's less likely to happen. But the important thing is to share your truth. Yes.
Were there any significant moments in your life that you felt it would be best to leave out? And how did you decide whether or not you needed to have those significant moments in it?
So, and I'm going to say it again for the microphone. The question was, are there any significant moments that you might have left out, and how did you decide to either leave them out or put them in? So these are not part of my 6 guidelines, but I call them guardrails. I have 3 guardrails I also live by. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Talk to you later.
Okay.
Those guardrails are, and I kind of touched on the first one, is to live by the fictionalized memoirist Hippocratic oath. Or maybe it's, and I should, it's the Hippocratic-ish oath. It's not really the Hippocratic oath, but it's to do no harm. And again, you're writing about yourself, but you're also writing about other people. And the goal is to write about, create these deeply nuanced character descriptions of an imperfect person. And there you get the essence of the person and what may have happened generally. But it's not, you're not naming them. It's not about, my father did this. The father in the book, this fictionalized father, did something. And so it's more about that character, that imperfect person, rather than a particular person. It's a very, very, very narrow path to walk. I know it is. But that is the approach I try to take, and not to assassinate people. Not character assassinations. Because that is about the person and not about the situation. Yes.
Are any of the characters in your story completely true? Like, some of them are fictionalized, but are some of them completely 100% true?
They're all based on, no, there's, so I'll give you an example of something that is true and how I changed it.
Okay.
So Philbit's father, like my own, was shot in the head while trying to break up a domestic dispute at the gas station, filling station, across the road from our house. And while that happened, that horrific event really happened, I changed the details significantly to fit my story.
Okay.
So when my father is still alive,
Wow.
but when he read it, he knew that it was based on the experience he lived through. But the actual events, they were rearranged a bit. So
Okay.
there was this, so that did happen. That's an example of something that did happen.
Right. Okay.
In my memoir, I changed the names of the bad people or people I didn't want to reveal. And one of my former students from '69, who has later had a big career in academia, read it for me. He said, "I know who all those people are."
Yeah, you can't really control what other people are going to do or say once it's out there. My family has made kind of a parlor game of it. When I went to visit them back in January after the book came out, they met me at the door with this big sheet of paper. And they said, "Did we get it right?" I said, "Did you get what right?" So the paper had 2 columns of words. Main characters, cameo appearance characters, real people. They had mapped people and characters. And I said, "I'm not going to confirm or deny anything."
How accurate
And
were they, though?
they didn't get everything right. They did not get everything right. But I think it's a natural, we have a natural tendency to want to know. Like, who is it?
Yeah.
But you can't control that. So that's a lesson I learned through this publishing process, is there's stuff you can't control. And once it's out there, you can't control what people write about in reviews. You can't control how anyone's going to react to it. All you can do is try to tell the story that you are compelled to tell, do anything that you can to minimize the negative impact on others, and then you have to own it. You have to live with it.
So what are the other two?
The other two, thank you. The second one is do not sugarcoat important issues like bullying or racism or homophobia or body shaming. And, it goes without saying that issues are not people. And the first point was about really people and protecting people. This is about issues. Issues are not people, but people create the issues. And so I felt that it was my responsibility to address those head on, unapologetically, but like a hammer. Like you got to, address it.
Right.
And so that I didn't hold back, and I, in fact, went full force towards it. The third one is to write from the heart, because I think that's the best way to get readers and to keep them. When you write from your heart. Now there's a risk here. There's another very narrow path to tread, which is you don't want to write with cloying sentimentality. And writing from the heart can look like that if you're not, careful about it. But those are the three guardrails I tried to, sort of as I bumped around inside this process, that's what I tried to keep me focused, in addition to these 6 guidelines about process. So I hope that helps. It does. Okay, so that's the end of my talk. How much time do we have?
I was told it would be
15 minutes.
15, okay.
I'm sorry, you have 20 minutes.
Okay, 20 minutes. Okay, that's perfect. So I designed this for people who may not have even started the process yet. I know some of you may have already, like a full manuscript. I know that there's some with that. Let me read what I wanted to say because it's not complicated, but I'll mess it up. So, it's on here. Sorry. I got information in all different places. I'm just a mess. So, okay. So does everybody have something to write on and write with? I hope so. And okay, let's see. Okay, here's the exercise. I hope you enjoy this. Write a one-sentence. I can repeat it. Write a one-sentence description of 3 different characters who are indelibly patterned on real people from your life. And it can be 2 sentences, but very brief. Descriptions of these characters who are indelibly patterned on people in your life, but who are purely fictionalized. So just write something that describes someone who might be a character in your book based on a real person.
Okay.
So take a few minutes to do that, and I'll be here if you have any questions or want to chat. We're going to take just a few minutes, and then we're going to talk about that. Let's take maybe another 30 seconds or so. Even if you're not finished, it's fine. Okay. I know you may not quite be finished, but it's really the exercise, something that maybe, if it works for you, has meaning for you, you can take along and work on it later. But so we don't have time to go through all three for people, even if you have time to write. So let's go around and maybe read our sentence, and maybe we can then, once we go through, we can talk about it a little bit too. I know Jan finished really early, so I'm going to call on you, Jan.
Okay,
Will you read yours for us?
just one.
Just one.
Okay, he is conflicted about his father.
Conflicted about his father. Why did you write that?
Well, I was thinking of my brother.
Mm-hmm.
He's not really conflicted about his father, but he should be.
That's interesting. That's you're setting up yourself with a little conflict right there already, aren't you?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Who wants to go next? Yes.
Edgar was tall and wore plaid shirts or gray and brown suits, as he followed his rules, whether for planting a garden in good soil or applying his education to the corporate job he worked for.
Wow, that's a lot of information in that one sentence.
It's my dad.
That's your dad. Why did you write that?
Because I'm thinking about, well, because he had an enormous effect, positive effect, but also destructive effect on my life.
Thank you. Who wants to go next? Yes.
She liked having wigs, but the wigs had wigs, since she didn't have enough wig heads.
She liked having wigs, but the wigs had
The wigs had wigs.
the wigs had
because she didn't
wigs.
have enough wig heads.
because she didn't have enough wig heads.
Oh.
I
My
love
mom
that.
loves wigs.
Her mom loves
My
wigs.
mom loves hats.
Oh my god. Why did you write that? Oh, because your mom loves wigs.
They're very different because she would care about how she looks in a different way than I do. So growing up, she really liked makeup. She would have me before I went to school clean her high heels. They had dirt on them, so they would be shiny.
Wow. There's so much rich description right there.
Yeah.
Who wants to go? Yes.
Okay. Ruby Ellen Idoliza Lee Hall spent her childhood trying hard to keep Daddy from hitting Mama off, and that meant Ruby was the one who got smacked. That's my mom.
Why do you want to write about her?
Well, I'm actually writing trying to write somebody else's memoir, and it's about her mother. And her mother, and so I thought of my mother. But I spent most of the time trying to fictionalize my mom's name. Her real name was Jewel Idoliza Lee Hall B.
Can't get much better than that.
But she went by Jill. Her dad did that with all of the kids. He named them, he gave them initials and then phonetic pronunciations. Anyway.
Interesting.
Oh, thank you.
Who's next? Yes, Jeff.
There we go. This lack of description. A cigarette dangles from my mother's mouth and difference from my father's as the three of us look straight ahead through the windshield towards the gray bay with a single boat coming off the horizon.
Beautiful.
That is beautiful. Why did you want to write that?
You know, it just popped in my head.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
It is. Who's next?
I'll go.
Okay.
Spencer, svelte and limber, a man who does not eat most things but has a skeleton full of secrets.
Ooh. And why did you write that?
That's my uncle, about whom I have a lot of resentment and hurt, and I feel like I need to be kinder to in my memoir. But I realize like he's never talked about all the things that have happened with anybody ever. Like period. It's all just in his body.
And there's a reason for
It
that.
has to be really like in trappings, It's sad. Like, you never let any of it out.
It's a very kind and empathetic approach to it.
I need to be kinder to him.
Thank you. Who's it? Yes.
Margot is a 17-year-old girl bowed down under the weight of her sister's death.
Margot is a young girl, 17-year-old girl, bowed down by the weight of her sister's recent death. Do you want to tell us why you wrote that?
That was not part of my
It's very brave to write about something so personal. Thank you.
That's a good word for that sentence.
Yeah. Thank you.
I like that you're taking it from the perspective of when you're a teenager instead of like older and all that.
Thank you for saying that, because I have toyed with at the end if I need to fictionalize looking back. So I'm, I want to do it. The other thing I wanted to mention about yours is interesting, because I'm in a critique group where we are all kind of writing about earlier times, mine is 70s, and how much smoking is like in everybody's story. Because, I mean, everybody smokes.
Everybody smokes.
Yeah.
It was just part of the life.
Yeah.
My mother smoked 60 years.
Oh my
I have a
God.
picture of my mother in the hospital after my sister was born with a cigarette. In the hospital. Yeah, it just, and I think probably younger people today have no concept of that. It's so much a part of it. We didn't know how it smelled.
When you read a book or see a TV show from that era,
Yeah.
you see it.
It is everywhere.
Yeah, to be a child growing up and remembering back to gatherings at the house, and the whole house was just, you could just see the fog. It was like,
Yeah.
and it was so common, you never thought about it.
I was in the hospital with encephalitis, and my mother, my father, and several of my mother's siblings were there. They were all smoking, and one of my aunts said, "Do you think this smoke's bothering?"
You're still here.
Barely conscious, and I remember how awful it was.
Do anybody else want to go? Read their sentence? Yes.
Ruby was tall, slim, with brown shoulder-length hair, trying not to let her tremor be seen by the others.
That's real.
Yeah, why did you write that?
My grandmother was 85.
Thank you.
Bubbly and spirited, Brittany is a social butterfly online and off. She lives to organize events that bring people together.
Why did you write that?
I have friends who, she is exactly that. And without her, we would all just party equally.
Beautiful.
Together.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Did anyone not get a chance to go? Well, how much time do we have? A couple of
I am just so enthralled in this. I'm being a terrible time.
No, you're not. We have, I think we have a couple minutes left.
What is time anyway?
Yes, what is
True.
time anyway?
Okay, we'll go with that.
Yeah, 11:30,
Cool.
so it's 7.
Okay,
Did you,
great.
did you write one?
I did not. Did
Oh,
you?
okay.
I did not.
You wrote a whole book.
I wrote a whole book.
It's not enough.
For you, and I don't know if you could quickly talk about how the book became a book, how
Okay.
it went from your manuscript to, I'm
Sure.
assuming you were produced and published.
I'm happy to. But first I want to say, so that is just a little baby exercise that helped me when I was having trouble. There's a person who traumatized me terribly, and how do I write about that person without writing about that person? And I tried to sort of step back and describe actions or things that physical description, something that gave me a window into why they did something. Like you mentioned Brittany, and she's online, but what is the impact of that? She brings people together. She keeps this core family of friends together. You know, if you look into what you've written, like yours with the wigs, it says you can find more than just sort of sitting down and trying to write the narrative and the dialogue. These little exercises can give you great narrative and dialogue. They really can. So it's just another little trick, I guess, that you can use to especially divert you away from the tendency, in some cases, I'll talk about myself, to really, sort of slap back, because it's a great tendency. Like, I feel hurt and harmed even after all these years. This allowed me to do it in a way that was kinder, to tell my truth, but not harm other people in doing it. That's the reason I wanted us to do this, and I hope that you got something out of it, maybe something to take away, an activity you can take away. So, my path to publication, actually going to be on a panel this afternoon, I think at 3 o'clock, 3:15. Who said that? Yes, because Beverly's on the panel too. And so we're going to talk about that. But very generally, I kind of accidentally fell into contact with a publisher who wanted to publish my book before I found an agent. Yeah.
Wow.
And I thought, is this a prank? And but I asked for a little bit of time to think about it because there was a small independent publisher, and I really didn't know how to navigate this world, even with an offer, because there's so much to deal with. Contracts.
Yeah.
Here's a tip. If you're not a member of the Authors Guild, I recommend you look into joining the Authors Guild. Because the Authors Guild has a legal team, and they will look at contracts as members. So if you're not agented, the idea I wanted to have an agent if I could get one, but I was, connected with the Authors Guild, and they offer a great service. So they can help you look at contracts, say this is probably something you want to go back and say, can we change that? Or they might say, absolutely not. This is not in your best interest. They're reputable. They're very skilled. Authors Guild. So anyway, I said. So then I went full force looking for a literary agent. I said, and my query letter, the first line was, I have an offer to publish. Very first line. Yeah, and I said, I would really rather go through this process with a literary agent. And I started. That was my job, sending out query letters for about 4 months, and
your manuscript was finished.
Manuscript was finished. I had worked with someone. She called herself a book doctor, and she really was. She's very helpful. There's a thing that I just learned called a development editor. Shane and I were talking about. It's just they call them DE. So if somebody says DE, it's a development editor, someone that you. And I don't know any of them yet, but there are people who, they help you develop a script to get it ready in better shape, to go to a literary agent or to go to a publisher. So she was essentially a DE, and I didn't know it. That helped me get the manuscript in pretty good shape. And so when the publisher got it, and I'll talk more about that this afternoon when Beverly and I are chatting. It was in pretty good shape. And it did go through an editing process with the publisher. I cut out, I think, 7,000 words. Wow. But they said, and the agent said, this is, it's in really good shape. I would typically work with a client they were talking today about editing. They had more time when they were first starting out than I did. But I did work with someone earlier.
You didn't do it backwards.
Everything in my life has been backwards.
How much did you pay to get it?
I think I even hate to say, because it was a friend of my partner, and I think I got a discount, and I don't even remember. I actually don't remember. I would say a couple of $1,000 is probably right, but I really don't remember. It's been 2 years. Yeah. But I think in that area is probably around the right range. Yes, 2 questions, yes.
Really quickly, I'm in grad school and I'm graduate in critical agency. But even, I'm not ever gonna claim, especially as young as I am, that I like know everything about it. Do you recommend that before you start clearing agents that you pay for an editor, or do you think that you just try to do the best you can, have maybe like friends read it, and then query, and then hope that they're willing to work with you if there's something that maybe holding them back?
So it can get expensive.
Mm-hmm.
Everything has a cost to it, both time and money. My advice is to attend conferences like this where you can meet people, like actually meet people. And if there's an option to actually spend time with a literary agent, do that and ask their advice, because I'm not an expert. Maybe show them a sample, and sometimes you can even, like, this is during the middle of the pandemic. Is it time? Okay, it's time. So I'll be outside. But and then I know you have a question too. But my advice is, like, there are webinars. I was in a couple of webinars which allowed you to actually have one-on-one time with an editor, with an agent later, and they will look at your manuscript and give you advice. That is much more inexpensive than just going out and getting a development editor. So I think, yeah, and having work like writing groups where people who are other writers can help you as well. I think that's a preferable path than just go out and spend a lot of money.
Yeah.
Good place to connect, right here.
Yeah, I love getting my MFA just because of the workshop
And
classes.
you,
Thank you.
thank you
Yeah,
so
thank you.
much. I hope this was helpful.
Oh, yeah.